Next, after that, we have Sharon Dolev. Sharon is the founder and director of the Israeli Disarmament Movement, representing ICANN in Israel, and the Middle East Treaty Organization project for a WMD free zone in the Middle East. In recent years, she presented a radio show called According to Foreign Sources, was the director of Greenpeace in Israel, and in the past, the coordinator of the Meretz Party in Israel. She is a peace and human rights activist.
Thank you, Imad. Thank you for inviting us. When it comes to the Middle East, I'm sorry to say, I guess it's everywhere in the world, but when you look at the politics, the way the superpowers, the way the media treats the Middle East and so on, there's so much hypocrisy. Look how the news in the US were swamped with the situation of women in Afghanistan, how much we cared about what the Taliban is doing to women in Afghanistan when there was a need to invade Afghanistan. But what about the women in Saudi Arabia, the new best friend of the US and Israel? So one of the things that I've noticed is that it's not just the superpowers and it's not just the leaders. Sometimes it's also us activists from around the world. I've been to so many events when I saw a full panel of Europeans, Americans, usually men, talking about the Middle East without one Middle Eastern in the room, unless we're there listening to what they have to tell us about how we should fix our problems. The thing is that we can fix our problems by ourselves. We have ideas, we know the situation, we know the region, and the only thing that was needed for us was a place to sit and talk together. We are very good at that once we're in the same room trying to solve problems. We actually want to live normal life like everybody else, and that seems sometimes that people forget. The superpowers are talking about the Middle East and they're forgetting that inside the Middle East there are people that just want to have life, just life, normal life. So we decided to change this. A group of activists from within the Middle East with activist specialists from outside the Middle East sat together for several years whenever we could meet. It's not easy for us to meet. Whenever we could sit together and mapped all the reasons we were told over the years why we cannot achieve a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. When we finished mapping all the obstacles, all the reasons everybody believed, and I'm talking about those diplomats at the UN, I'm talking about politicians inside the states, all those that understand about nuclear weapons and looked at us as if we were naive. When we looked at all the obstacles, mapped them and put them in categories, we realized that there were no real obstacles. They said that a WMD free zone treaty is impossible for several reasons, because there's no peace, because the states don't talk to each other, and because there was never a draft treaty or treaty for all weapons of mass destruction in one treaty. So when we took all the obstacles, and there were dozens of them, and we mapped them, we realized that there was only one obstacle. And the one obstacle was no goodwill. One of the reasons there's no goodwill is on one side Israel, that think that it can still maintain a status quo of having nuclear weapons while the other don't. And on the other side, Arab states that are also quite comfortable with the situation when they have a good reason to blame Israel while not believing that Israel will use its nuclear weapons. But the problem is that this status quo is not there to stay. This status quo means that for now, Israel is the only nuclear weapon state. But if you look not at what our leaders tell us, but at their sorry, I forgot the word, the real things that are happening on the ground, you can see that it's not Iran that we need to be worried about. It's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia with its new missiles, capable of carrying weapons of mass destruction, with its deals with Pakistan, with its own nuclear facility, but nobody will talk about Saudi Arabia. It's not comfortable, right? There is no way of securing the Middle East even if there's no peace, even if we can't talk to each other, as long as there are weapons of mass destruction on the ground. This is the first place you should extract weapons of mass destruction because we don't have peace, because we don't talk to each other. Because we were told that a treaty for a WMD free zone in the Middle East is impossible, we decided to do exactly that and write a text. Because we knew that the states will take the text and tear it apart and use it as a tool against each other, we wrote it in a way that you cannot fight over the draft treaty. It will always stay a draft. Everybody is welcome to take it, it's an open source, tear it apart, but now that we have a draft treaty, nobody can tell us that a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East is impossible. We are creating from the ground the Middle East Treaty Organization, where people from the states already started talking together, negotiating this draft treaty, making it much better. This is our third draft for the draft treaty. And in it, there are the ideas, the obstacles, the solutions from people that used to negotiate for the states, from Egypt, from the Arab League, from Iran. Those people that used to negotiate and say that there's no solution stopped talking about the obstacle, sat in the same room and talked about how do we save the draft treaty, how do we save this project, how do we work together. We know that when we sit together, looking at possibilities, believing that we can achieve them, we can achieve a lot. If you like to join us, and if you like to hear more, and if you like to support us in any way possible, even like editing our very bad English, you're very welcome to write to us. It's the METO, M-E-T-O, at wmd.free.me. And I have some copies of draft treaties here if you like. Thank you very much.
We also have Yayoi Tsuchida. And Yayoi Tsuchida has long been an international secretary and more recently the Assistant Secretary General of GENSUICO, the Japan Council Against A&H Bombs. She is also a member of the International Peace Bureau Board of Directors. Yayoi is a nuclear weapons abolition organizer, speaker, and advocate, and having led numerous delegations to the UN and other international disarmament forums. She has arranged numerous speaking tours of Hibakusha, witness survivors of the atomic bombings, in Asia, Europe, and North America, and has also worked closely with Pacific Island A-bomb survivors and their descendants, especially in the Marshall Islands.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak before you. I came from Japan, coming from the Japan Council Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bomb. I would like to speak on the situation of Japan and the perspective of Japanese movement on the theme of this meeting. In English is not my mother tongue, so I prepared the text, so I want to read it. While the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, is expected in the near future, the danger of new nuclear arms race is increasing. What actions do we take towards 2020, the year marking the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombing? This is a challenge before us. Any use of single nuclear weapons would have catastrophic humanitarian consequences, as evidenced by the damage of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The nuclear powers, however, are pushing ahead with their so-called nuclear deterrence policies, which bring the humanity on the brink of the extinction. The Trump administration set out new nuclear posture review aimed at developing small nuclear weapons and lowering the threshold of nuclear weapon use. It also pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA, and now the INF Treaty unilaterally. In response, Russian President Putin suggested the development of a new type of nuclear weapons and missile deployment in its allied territories. China, too, is engaged in the increase of nuclear warheads. These developments are eliciting growing concern about resurgence of the past nuclear arms race between superpowers. However, I am confident that the global trend for peace and against nuclear weapons will never allow such a counter-current to prevail. We have the TPNW in hand. It in itself piles the heaviest pressure on nuclear powers. Besides, we have the power of the movement and public opinion that has given birth to the TPNW, as well as broad cooperation with like-minded governments. The outrageous acts of the US and other nuclear powers are arousing criticism anew. Herein lies new momentum building up in public opinion and movements. Following the adoption of joint resolutions calling on the US government to join the TPNW by the State Assembly of California, and then the Council of Washington, D.C., a resolution that calls on the US government to support the treaty and make nuclear disarmament a central focus of US national security policy, was submitted to the US Congress recently. In Australia, a nuclear umbrella state, the Labour Party decided that it would join in the TPNW when it takes power. The possibility of achieving denuclearization and peace of the Korean Peninsula was opened up by mounting public opinion for peace and against nuclear weapons in this region and the rest of the world. Those governments which have supported and promoted the TPNW are also making intensive effort to achieve the abolition of nuclear weapons with a sense of urgency. If we can develop this momentum, we are sure that we can defeat such dangerous rollbacks. We have such potential in our hands. When the TPNW was adopted in the UN, I vividly remember that Setsuko Taro, a Hibakusha, said, "We are in the point of no return. Nuclear powers cannot reverse the global current from heading for a world without nuclear weapons. With this conviction, let's take actions worldwide." Although Japan is the only able country, Abe government has taken shameful attitude, categorically refusing to sign and ratify the TPNW. Before the NPT PrepCom started, we had a meeting with the Japanese Foreign Ministry. They did not even hesitate to say that a change in the Korean situation toward denuclearization and peace was brought about by the US nuclear deterrence. Needless to say, we all severely condemned this comment. In order for Japan to be protected by US extended deterrence, including nuclear, Abe government is rushing to make Japan a war-fighting country through the reinforcement of Japan-US military alliance, the reinterpretation of the Constitution, to have resort to the collective self-defense, legislation of war laws and state secrecy law, the new base construction for the US Marines in Okinawa, and the revision of the Constitution, throwing away the position of exclusive defense. It has been promoting unconstitutional military buildup, as seen in the record high defense spending, transformation of Izumo-class destroyers to aircraft carrier, and bulk buying of F-35 stealth fighters from the US. The people are left to bear this burden through consumption tax rate hike and cut off Social Security. However, changes are occurring in Japan too. The number of collected signatures in support of the appeal of Hibakusha for the elimination of nuclear weapons has exceeded 9.41 million. The endorsement of the appeal by mayors and governors in Japan have reached 1,205. Anti-nuclear and peace organizations, which had worked separately before, are now developing joint work beyond their differences of opinions. There was not such cooperation before. A total of 359 local assemblies, more than 20% of all municipalities in Japan, have adopted resolutions calling on the Japanese government to sign and ratify the TPNW. Even conservative council members of the ruling parties sometimes work together for the adoption of the resolutions on local level. The Hibakusha Appeal International Signature Campaign aims at collecting hundreds of millions of petitions worldwide by 2020. Together with the Hibakusha, we are going to do the utmost to develop this campaign in and out of Japan. We sincerely ask you to cooperate with us in promoting the signature campaign in your countries and communities from now towards 2020. The enhancement of public opinion and movements in Japan made the Abe government give up submitting a bill for the revision of the Constitution to the session of the Diet last year. With the victory of Mr. Deni Tamaki being elected as Okinawa governor, Okinawan people's opposition to the construction of a US military base in Henoko has achieved new advances in the struggle to stop outrages of the Japanese and US governments. Expecting that from this year towards 2020, we will enter a crucial stage of our entry into force of the TPNW and 2020 NPT Review Conference. We are calling for developing magnificent movements contributing to achieving a world without nuclear weapons. Especially in Japan, we have to build up such a movement strong enough to make the Japanese government join the TPNW and take nuclear-free and peaceful policies. Also, in the NPT process, nuclear powers are working to undermine its past achievements. It is serious that the US and other nuclear weapon states are trying to deny the commitments which their own governments, own countries have once accepted, such as unequivocal undertaking to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals agreed upon at the 2000 NPT Review Conference, and special effort to establish necessary framework to achieve and maintain a world without nuclear weapons, agreed upon at the 2010 NPT Review Conference. Making light of obligations of negotiating the elimination of nuclear weapons will lead to the collapse of the NPT. Towards 2020 NPT Review Conference, we have to defeat their attempts and make them implement their obligations and commitments. In order to open up the way to the abolition of nuclear weapons, we propose to enhance public support and movement drastically from this year in each country and make the occasion of the 2020 NPT Review Conference a rallying point of worldwide actions. We are encouraged to hear that friends of US, Europe, and IPB have already proposed a concrete action plan. In particular, we welcome and support the idea of holding in New York an international conference like World Conference Against A&H Bombs. Since the first one being held in 1955 in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the World Conference Against A&H Bombs has upheld the three main goals: prevention of nuclear war, abolition of nuclear weapons, and support for the Hibakusha A-bomb victims. It has mobilized movement and individuals of the world who support these goals and worked together with like-minded governments. It is greatly significant that inheriting its basic spirit, the World Conference will be held in New York, the major city of US nuclear power. I was very impressed by this plan. I will do our utmost in Japan so that the Hibakusha and the broad range of Japanese movement can work together for a success of the planned actions. The year 2020 marks the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The earnest desire of the Hibakusha is to get nuclear weapons abolished in their lifetime. Let's work together to achieve the entry into force of the TPNW and make the opportunity of the 2020 NPT Review Conference a point of decisive turn for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.
And closing us out today will be this morning, will be Oleg Bodrov. The life of this physicist and researcher was changed in 1986 when he visited Chernobyl. Oleg Bodrov was an engineer researcher engaged in testing reactor units of nuclear submarines in the Scientific Research Technological Institute in Sosnovy, Leningrad Oblast, Russia. And from 1980 to 1993 was a researcher and head of group of Sosnovy Bor's Regional Ecological Laboratory of the Klopin Radium Institute in St. Petersburg, Russia. In Chernobyl, Oleg saw the results of the disaster. He also realized the consequences of the state limiting access to information about nuclear safety and its environmental impacts. He has since redirected his life's work from research labs to studying and reporting about radiation leakage, especially in the Baltic, how to safely decommission nuclear power plants, the social and environmental responsibilities of nuclear operator, and for peace in the increasingly militarized Baltic region.
And I'd like to speak about the Baltic Sea Origin. I arrived here from St. Petersburg, and I am a physicist. Many years I was a part of the Soviet and Russian nuclear industry. And after the Chernobyl accident, I decided to be outside of this industry. And now I'm an expert on different international organizations. And I will speak about the civil and military nuclear industry, serious problem for all countries, and reasonable to think about this. And in the same time, it is one of the most traffic traffic sea, and one of the most contaminated sea. Just now, when NATO came to the Russian border, it is one of the high level of the confrontation between Russia and the United States. This is, in the beginning, I'd like to say about so-called civil nuclear industry. And first of all, I'd like to say that after the Chernobyl accident and after the Fukushima, many countries in Europe, and not only in Europe, decided to stop the construction of new nuclear power plants. For example, Germany very soon will close all nuclear power plants. Sweden, after the nuclear power plants reach design limit, already closed some nuclear reactors. And the same situation in Lithuania, Ignalina closed. You can see in this map, in the western part of the Baltic Sea, from the left side, more green triangles. It means that it is closed nuclear reactors. But for me, because I live in Russia, I know what does it mean for the Russians. And when I read the documents between Finnish company, which is promoter of this nuclear power plant, and the Rosatom, Russian state corporation, there are very small paragraph that Russia will provide the fresh fuel for this nuclear power plant in Finland from the uranium after the extraction, after the reprocessing of the spent fuel rods on the Russian territory. Maybe you know that it is extremely dirty technologies. And in the same time, this technology we have in Russia in very special places. Next slide, please. Maybe you know when was Cold War, Russia established 20 so-called nuclear cities, which is provided the uranium and plutonium extraction for the nuclear weapons, but also in these cities started to develop the civil nuclear industry like nuclear power plant. Now, the reprocessing plant, we have only in 2 points, in 2 nuclear cities, single industry cities, in Ural region, in Mayak, and in Siberia, in Zheleznogorsk. So all spent fuel rods, not only from the nuclear power plants, but also from the Russian nuclear submarines, came to these points for the reprocessing. So after the reprocessing of the uranium, in Russia, they fabricated the fresh fuel for the nuclear power plant. So it means that all consumers of the electricity from the Russian nuclear power plant, which is under construction in the eastern part of the Baltic Sea, these consumers of the electricity will invest money to the Russian military program for the reprocessing spent fuel rods. When I asked Finnish parliamentarians, do you know about this? They said, no, it is Russian responsibilities and we are not part of this process. But Russia is part of the process. When in Russia, every year in Chelyabinsk region, they reprocess 100 tons of the spent fuel rods from the nuclear submarines and from the civilian and from the nuclear power plants. During the reprocessing 100 tons, they generate 600,000 cubic meters of the radioactive waste. And this waste they discharge to the nature, to the Techa River. And this radiative contamination migrated by the river to the polar ocean, and with the, this contamination reach very soon, maybe 30, 40 years later, to the European countries. And all Europeans, which is use nuclear electricity, will get the radionuclides on his table with the seafoods, with the fish. So there are no any complex analysis of this problem. And it means that Europeans who construct nuclear power plants with the reactor VVR 1200 will support Russian military nuclear infrastructure because it is part of the reprocessing of the nuclear submarine spent fuel rods. Next slide, please. My skill. And as I said, it is extremely dirty technology. This is area with 100 kilometers from Mayak reprocessing facilities already contaminated by plutonium-239. This radioactive element have a half-time life, 24,000 years. So it means this area already contaminated by radionuclides. And it is a result of the weapon-grade plutonium production and reprocessing of the spent fuel rods. So it is a serious problem for the Russians who live in this area. And there are not very good situation with the health conditions. And next slide, please. So I already said that this contamination migrate to the polar ocean, and it is not only a problem for the Russians, but also for the in global perspective. And and it is important for Russia, first of all, of course. Next slide, please. Another aspect of the problem in the Baltic Sea region is the increasing number of the confrontation between NATO and Russia. When NATO came to the Russian border, there are increasing number of the permanent troops from the Russian and NATO side, and the number of the war exercises has increased rapidly, and so we have much more risks for the conflict in this area now. Next slide, please. In the same time, we have a militarization style of thinking in Russia. According to Russian doctrine, Russia could be the first to use nuclear weapons now. It is a declaration of the Russian president. Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation said that the prohibition of nuclear weapons is contrary to the national interest of the Russia. And in the last year, President of the Russia personally launched the Russian nuclear triads. 4 transcontinental missiles were launched from the submarines, air and ground-based facilities capable of carrying nuclear weapons. So it means that the Supreme Commander-in-Chief demonstrated psychological readiness to use the nuclear weapons. And in the same time, there are no any peace movement in Russia, unfortunately. Next slide, please. What reasonable and what can we do? In this year, we started the campaign with our Scandinavian colleagues against militarization and nuclearization of the Baltic Sea. And when I will come back to the Russia from the United States, I will go to the Finland, and it will be a special ceremony when we will present our petition to the Finnish parliamentarians and Finnish authorities that we want to stop this process. And this petition supported not only Scandinavian country, not only Russian ecological and non-governmental organization, which is human rights organizations and other organizations. There are signatures from United States, from Japan, from the many countries. And it is a focus that we need to lobby equal environmental and we need to protect our common home, Baltic Sea region. At the same time, reasonable if we will lobby the equal environmental and public participation standards in Russia and in European Union for the export-import operation of nuclear electricity and for the technology from Russia. Because now the Europeans have no information about the fabrication of the fresh fuel for the nuclear power plant, which is under construction in European countries. But reasonable if decision makers in Europe will know about the global risk and global consequences of this process. And we need to stop the transportation of the spent fuel rods between the countries and between the region. In the same time, I think one of the main messages from our organization that not only politicians, but we are from United States, from Russia, from Europe, responsible for our common planet. So let's be together. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to open it up to Q&A, being very conscious of time because we do not want to keep Daniel Ellsberg waiting.